Welcome to Big Brave Business. This is the podcast where we answer big questions reshaping entrepreneurship. I'm Sarah K. Heater, and this is Season 3. Each week, I'm bringing on my friends, mentors, and some of the best thought leaders I know. We dive into bold, values-driven conversations about leadership, equity, ethics, and building businesses that actually make a difference. Ready to do business better? Let's dive in.
Welcome back to Big Brave Business. I wanted to open this new year with an episode about my predictions for the online business world in 2026. And I think that this is something that is a callback to the early days of this podcast. I have done this in previous years with Amanda and on my own, predicting what's coming in the next year. I should actually go back and revisit what I said in previous seasons, but anyway, my friend Kaili was asking people about this in coffee chats, and then she posted about it on Threads, and I thought the responses were really interesting, and it really made me stop to consider and think what my answer would be. What do I really think is coming? And as I was reading people's answers, there's things that I'm just not sure I buy into, or I'm very curious because it's not necessarily something I have the data on to be able to project. But I can tell you what I do think is coming. So let me just say that's what we're talking about today is what I don't think is coming and what I do think is coming and what other people are predicting. So first, let's talk about some of the stuff that I have seen. I've seen people talking about subscription fatigue. That's something that I heard very mixed messages on this year in 2025. I heard that some people were really advocating people are tired of subscription models. They want to be able to pay a lifetime fee for access to something, and they would prefer to do that once than to be in, even if it's a higher amount, than to be in an ongoing monthly subscription. I have noticed that subscription creep is definitely a bigger part of the conversation. I think it's something we can all relate to and have all felt where periodically you maybe stop to assess what your actual expenses are each month, let alone each year, those recurring fees that you're paying, and try to find ways to decrease them, downsize plans, or even cancel entire services in order to decrease the monthly spend or even, like I said, even annual spend. And that is, I think, very real. I do think there's some subscription fatigue, and I would say that's not necessarily new. I think it's been mounting, but this whole push for memberships and other types of subscription models as a way to have built-in monthly recurring revenue, I think what's going on here, and this is really interesting, is that this model became so accessible for so many people. It really did kind of become in the past 5 years, we saw a rapid increase of everything turned to subscription. And some even before that, because Microsoft Office went from primarily selling a license key to a specific model, and then as long as you wanted to keep that model, you could just keep that license, and then if you wanted to upgrade to a new current version of the software, that's when you would have to invest in it again. They switched to primarily selling Microsoft Office 365, right? And that was before the last 5 years. Also, Adobe did that. You used to be able to buy, like, CD-ROM versions of whatever programs you wanted. Now you have a subscription to Creative Cloud. Again, that's more than 5 years old, but we saw, like, big tech leaders starting with that. Of course, things like Netflix and other streaming models, those have been on the rise for many years. Netflix, of course, wasn't originally a streaming model, but it was one of the early ones. All of that to say, that's based on a monthly subscription model, and gyms have been doing this for decades, right? Where you pay that monthly fee and you get access to their services and their equipment. It's not like subscriptions are a new thing, but I do think there's been, like, a rapid increase, and a lot of pressure for everything to become a subscription model. Now it seems like pretty much everything we're using for business is based on a subscription model. And with the rapid advancement of AI, we're seeing the cost of those subscriptions dramatically increase because the AI capabilities really open up a lot of new possibilities in a perfect world. However, it also, with the rise of AI, we're having a lot less human support. So, in a lot of cases, those subscription fees that we're paying become very frustrating because when there's something that doesn't work or something goes wrong, or you just need customer service, they put you through AI before you have any ability to talk to a person. And maybe you even have no way of talking to a person or accessing a person, and entire departments have been eliminated. They've used this as an opportunity to cut costs of human labor in order to have AI run things, but then they're actually raising prices, and that just feels very, very frustrating when, to a certain degree, the service gets worse, the experience gets worse, but the cost goes up. And their defense of it is that they had to do mass layoffs because of the adoption of AI. What I think we're really seeing here when it comes to AI, by the way, in this specific instance, is that AI is really geared toward optimizing things on an ongoing or long-term basis, but the implementation is expensive and sometimes very clunky. So when these corporations especially are implementing AI, especially widespread AI that replaces humans, especially entire departments of humans, they're not efficient. So anyway, I think it's expensive in both time and resources. And yeah, so that doesn't lead to, like, a great user experience. All of that to be said, I think this is what we're kind of seeing across the board with a lot of these subscriptions now become very frustrating. And in addition, we look at our bills and we think $5 here, $12 here, $29 here, $59 here, $99 here. None of those things on their own are a lot, but when you add them all up, you're like, man, this is where my entire budget is going, is to subscriptions. Do we use all of these subscriptions consistently? Do we need to be paying for them? It's funny, like, for example, I pay for a subscription for both Claude and ChatGPT. Do I need both? No. I know many people who like choose between them. I also know people who have subscriptions to like a lot more than that. Those are the only two right now of LLMs that I am subscribed to, but I have heard people talk about both directions, like picking something as well as having all of them. Do you really need all of them? I mean, they do have different strengths, and that's my defense, is that there's certain things I like using Claude for and certain things I like using ChatGPT for. And I do definitely use both, but could I cut costs by eliminating one of those subscriptions? Certainly I could. And if you have several of them, then you have to take a step back and say, how often do I use this? Do I use it often enough to warrant a monthly subscription for this? Or could I go ahead and just pause it? And then if I need it, I can resubscribe for that month while I'm working on something that uses that service, and then I can unsubscribe again. If there's an annual commitment in a subscription, then we have to decide, well, is it even worth it? Because if I don't need a year's worth of work, like, I may not need to use this subscription at all. Maybe I'm going to find an alternative. So I think there's been a lot of, yeah, I subscription fatigue is a great way to put it. Somebody else worded it that way, not me. I do think subscription fatigue is really true. Now, what does that mean for us? So number one, if this is what we're feeling, then when somebody in our world, me or any of the people who have been guests on here, who are putting together their offer suite, if they are putting together an offer that is $99 a month or something like that, what that can feel like to the customer, instead of like, hey, here's a really accessible option for you, it can feel like, ugh, not another subscription. I'm tired. I'm tired of this, right? I think that because this kind of business model of having built-in monthly recurring revenue, or MRR, because that became such a, like, pressure packed, you should be doing this in business. And by the way, that is my advice as well. My business is service based and it is a monthly services model. So there is a monthly, essentially, retainer fee that is paid month over month. And I'm a big advocate for that. I think that's built a lot of sustainability in my business. And I think that's been a big reason why, thankfully, thus far, I've only seen an increase in year over year revenue. I have not taken a step backwards. I have not had like a $0 month. I have not had those kind of struggles. And I think it's because my offers are built. I mean, this is not the only reason, but one of the reasons is because my offers are built around monthly recurring revenue. I think that matters. But this has kind of gotten twisted where it's like, well, then how can I come up with something that fits into monthly recurring revenue? I should start a membership or I should sell access to a resource library and it's going to be a monthly subscription. The thing is, with instances like that, what we're doing is we're actually creating offers based on what we need and our income goals and what we're trying to accomplish, rather than creating offers that our customers actually want or need. And so I think when you think about, oh, I want to start a membership, or like, oh, I'll do a Patreon or something like that, the question really needs to be, is that because it's a good way to serve you and your goals? Or is that because it's a good way to serve your customers? And I think the fatigue comes from people trying to build businesses, eager to have comfort in capitalism, eager to relieve some of the pain of not being part of the top 1% in our current society structure, the pain that comes with that. We are all eager to find a magic bullet solution that's going to ease some of that pain and pressure. And when someone sells us, hey, here's the magic bullet, I hate that expression, but here's the magic solution. The magic overnight solution is start a membership or some kind of subscription, then that feels really appealing to us because it helps us achieve our goals. And one thing that I heard someone say a long time ago, and it's really stuck with me, and it's such a foundational cornerstone of how I do business, is that your revenue goals are not your customer's responsibility. Okay. I'm going to say that again. Your revenue goals are not your customer's responsibility. When we start to get that twisted, when we start to think of our business as something that is about our goals and what we're trying to accomplish, then the ethics start to get really muddied. And that's where our offers start to fall into this category of like, well, does this count as subscription fatigue? So, do I think that means your monthly recurring revenue model is something that you need to eliminate? Do I think that means no one should have a membership? Do I think that subscriptions are going away? No. I don't think any of those things are true. However, I think the reason why it is a trend that we're going into 2026 with is because if you created a membership because it is what's best for you, and someone told you this was gonna be, like, some secret solution to business, is that you have this built-in money, then that's where I'm gonna say there's gonna be a trend of those things cycling out. We've seen the trend in people are starting those memberships, quote, unquote, "memberships." Everybody's got a freaking Circle account. Everybody's got, and this is no shade to you if you do host something on Circle, because I've been a part of communities that are on Circle that are great. But everybody started throwing around this word community, and right, we did an episode on this like a year ago with Gabby Barrero as a guest, where we talked about the ethics of community, and she was really sharing kind of a lot of these same talking points even a year ago. So as far as, is this a trend for 2026 specifically? No, but this is the state that we are definitely in, which is, when you think membership, you should ask yourself, is this community? Like, and is community what my ideal client is seeking from me? Like, does that make sense? right? And if it doesn't, that's when I think we are going to see a downward trend of those things, those kind of things lasting. Now, I say this as somebody who's had a membership in my business. I have some friends who have been through this too, where we had memberships, we could sell them, we were making revenue. The truth is, people treated them like gym memberships. They paid the monthly fee. They probably didn't even remember in some cases that they were still paying a monthly fee or an annual fee. And the truth is, they weren't participating or they weren't barely participating. And so maybe occasionally they'd be motivated and they'd show up for a little bit and then they'd be gone for a while again. And they're just paying this monthly fee for like access so that when they decide they want to, they can do it. And also just out of laziness of forgetting to unsubscribe. Now, this is where it really does feel like a gym membership, right? Because if you've ever joined a gym, you've probably gotten caught in a loop where you're paying these gym membership fees and you don't go for a while and you're trying to justify, like, yeah, but I'd like to be a person who goes to the gym really regularly. And then they make it really hard for you to cancel, and you've got all these extra hidden fees and all this shit, right? So it's layered, and I don't think people are generally doing that as much in the online business space. I'm sure there's examples, but I think for the most part, the part that feels like it's similar is people sign up because, yeah, it is a dollar amount that's not going to interfere with their daily lives. That means they're going to be okay with continuing to pay it even when they don't use the service. And if that's how we're approaching business, you can already see where that's not going to be like a super ethical or core values or mission driven way to do business. Whose core values are like, oh, I hope I can like kind of trick people into continuing to pay for services they don't want or need. No, that's not ethics, right? So I do think there's some validity to that. Now, I'm also hearing a lot of chatter about a return to in-person events. Now, people have kind of been predicting this since basically 2021. So obviously in 2020, we all know that there was a lack of in-person events and a lack of human connection. With that, the rise of virtual events, virtual community, virtual networking all went up, right? Even virtual school. Then, as things started to open back up, we had a little bit of a toss up. There were people who were like, yes, thank God I missed this human to human connection face to face. But then there were also people who were like, no, I love the convenience of being able to attend on Zoom. Then, as time continued to pass, people are like, well, now we all have Zoom fatigue and everybody's sick of being on Zoom and everybody's meetings are just Zoom, Zoom, Zoom. They're all ready to be back in person. So, we're seeing a decrease in attendance and in impact from virtual events. And so now we're seeing a return to in person events. Now, I'll be real with you, I don't have in person events, I don't hold any. So, to be able to truly say what I see in this trend is not fair because this isn't my area of expertise. I will say, I think there's still room for both. And what I think the difference is that in 2020, we were all so starved for any kind of connection with other humans. And so many people were forced out of the workforce, the traditional workforce, especially women. So they turned to entrepreneurship, and online entrepreneurship became an avenue where you could do this in quarantine. And so connecting virtually was definitely a meteoric rise at that time. Now, of course, we've seen that level out a bit. Number one, as some people have returned to work. Number two, as people have returned to in person connections and started discovering in person connections, because a lot of people who started businesses, myself included, I started my business in 2019. So Q4 2019. So right before everything shut down. I didn't belong to an in person networking group until 2024. So, I get it. I do think there is some room for acknowledging those trends. That said, I don't personally think virtual connections, virtual community, virtual events are going to go anywhere. I think there's still a lot of room for quality value add groups. That's really, again, it's kind of going to be a callback to what I said about memberships and subscriptions, which is if it adds value, I think that virtual is still going to be valid. So, I think that there's still a need for people to be able to have the convenience of working around their kids' school schedules, wanting to work from anywhere, wanting to do whatever it is you need or want to do virtually and at your fingertips and from any device with internet access. And also, people do participate in in-person networking and events as well. I don't necessarily think I'm not sold that we're gonna see a surge of participation in in-person events or even a surge of quality offering of in-person events, because I don't think the market has changed as much as some people would suggest. Like, I don't think 2026 is gonna be the year that suddenly everybody's bursting to spend $10,000 on your retreat. I just don't. And I could be wrong, but I just don't think that. There's always been a market for people who are able and willing to spend that, and I think there is still a market. So it's not that I think they're gonna go down, I just don't necessarily think this is the year of retreats or this is the year of conferences or something like that. There is a lot of room for people to start new quality conferences, but that's true online or in person, in my opinion. So I don't think that people are like, "Oh, I won't participate in an online one anymore," if they truly see that it has value. Okay, so of course, another thing that I've heard people talk quite a bit about when it comes to anticipated trends for 2026 is around AI. Now, this is really interesting because a lot of what I've heard people say is that essentially, like, the bubble's going to burst, or that this, like, on-ramp we've been accelerating on for AI is going to slow down. I truly don't think that is going to be the case in 2026, with an asterisk. So in podcast launch prep week, by the way, that I just had, one of the participants, Ivy, shout out to you if you're listening, Ivy. Ivy actually said to me, I said so many times during the week with an asterisk about nuance or complexity or more context or it depends or whatever, that she was like, that should be the name of your email newsletter with an asterisk. So I think that probably will happen. But anyway, so I don't necessarily think that we are going to see that happen with AI slowing down, with an asterisk, because a lot of what is dependent on AI and the like outlook for AI is policy. And that is so tumultuous, especially in the United States right now, which is where I'm based. And I just think that's going to impact a lot of what progresses and what doesn't. So you know that, the current administration, which is the Trump administration in the United States, spends a lot of time with the tech billionaires who are responsible for growing and developing these AI companies. They are attending events together and definitely like on the same side, if you will. So I could see if there was a toppling of power, and we are going into an election year, a mid-cycle election, a midterm as we call them. I do think there's a possibility that if the power structure dramatically shifts in 2026, that would then impact what happens with these tech companies, because I think the policy will conversations will reflect that, and also how much power these tech billionaires have when it comes to influencing policy, regulation, and lack thereof. So that's my asterisk, is that I'm not predicting in this episode much about policy. I'm going to try to stay out of that in this episode. So that would definitely impact things. However, I think that by the nature of generative AI and what it does, I think the rapid development of generative AI going further and further, I don't think that's something. I think we'd have to actively try to stall it. That's the truth. I think that even left to its own devices from this point forward, it will continue to evolve very rapidly, kind of on its own. Now, I don't literally mean like there's robots that like become sentient. I don't mean that. I just mean that how fast we've gone from, hey, you can ask ChatGPT to tell you funny jokes and it will respond. We've gone from that to in 30 seconds, it will write an entire app for you. And that happened very, very quickly. And so I think its ability to analyze and generate images and video that are very realistic and lifelike at this point, its ability to generate code, its ability to we're seeing an impact on not just writers who and artists who were the initial we're seeing an impact on not just writers and artists who I feel like were kind of the initial targets, if you will, of generative AI kind of taking jobs. But now we're seeing this among developers, even, right? Now, I'm not trying to make any writers, artists, developers, or defenders thereof anxious, right? Or defensive. I do not really think AI is a threat to human jobs. That said, it is going to change them. It has already changed them. It has already changed writers' jobs, artists' jobs, and developers' jobs. And I'm not saying that that is a good thing. In some ways, it's great, and in some ways, it's terrible and traumatic, right? So it's all of all of these things at once. That's a whole other conversation. This is not me advocating for AI, but it's me predicting what I see. I don't think there's going to be a bubble burst on AI. Now there may be a bubble burst on the tech billionaires, and that will, of course, impact what we see happen with companies like OpenAI, who does ChatGPT, and Anthropic, which does Claude, and so on and so forth. Of course, Google has Gemini. But I do think that the concept of generative AI, the deep fakes, and that threat, the development of AI when it comes to research and, like, especially medical research. I've heard some really cool use cases there. Accessibility for learning and communication. I've heard some really cool use cases there. And definitely access to technology, making technology accessible on a whole other level. And what I mean by that is I'm a person who has now built some preliminary, like, very basic apps myself. I have no experience as a developer. So while I am interested in this kind of tech, and I've kind of always been interested in this kind of tech, I do not have experience in development or computer programming. So I am not an app builder by trade. And the fact that I can and I can do more and more kind of every month. And in 6 months or a year from now, I cannot even imagine what will be possible for those of us who want to leverage this technology. And again, I'm not talking about robots becoming sentient, but I am talking about making everything better. And better is with an asterisk. So I mean faster, more efficient, more accessible. I mean, truly, I do think it's rapidly improving accessibility. Okay, for example, my friend Erin Perkins, who's been a guest on this podcast multiple times when we've had conversations about accessibility, she's now a tech founder herself. She has been working with a developer on building an app that she originally had the idea for called Successible. It's an app that is an accessibility assistant and it's meant to support content creators, designers, service providers in ensuring that whatever content they create is created with accessibility in mind. So her app is called Successible. And the only reason why things like this are possible, now I actually haven't at the time of recording this watched the demo yet of Successible, so I don't know exactly like how it works, but certainly there's components of AI incorporated in this. Now she is working with a developer, so it's not like this has put her in a position where she could build this herself without the help of a developer. But my point is that AI is making technology more accessible to all of us. And it just wouldn't be as feasible for everyday people to develop apps and to become truly tech founders without access to technology in this way. It was previously very expensive and those doors were very gate kept. So now we can blow them open, right? And that is really powerful for doing a lot of good in the world. So I think when people talk about a bubble bursting for AI, I think there's a couple things going on here. When we talk about a bubble bursting, I think when it comes to AI, I think there's a couple of things that are going on. One thing is that I think there's a large, very loud group of people, and you may be one of them, who very vocally does not like AI and does not like generative AI as a concept, does not like the implications of generative AI, does not like the way AI was created. There's a couple things I want to say here, but they do overlap. And so I think, like, generally refusing to adopt it and not liking it is a part of why there are people who are making predictions this isn't going to last, because they don't like it and they don't want to participate, and they're hearing and spending time with other people who don't like it and don't want to participate. And as somebody who absolutely does use it, I what I really see is that I don't think this is a door you can close again. I think this is a Pandora's box that has been opened, and I think really this has been a work in progress for a long period of time. I AI has been around since the 50s, and I think that it's been rapidly progressing in the past 70 years. And yeah, I don't think you can shove the genie back in the bottle. That said, I know it kind of can become a little bit of a tug of war between, but I hate it. And obviously, then there are people who really love it. And I think for the most part, I would put myself in a category of I really love it, but I also hate it. So I do understand both sides. And I say this with empathy because I think hating it and hearing from a very vocal group of people, of a very vocal population and community to be a part of, you're not the only one who hates it, that if this is you, that it can make you feel like, well, then this isn't long for this world because it's not what people want. And ultimately, what people want will dictate the market. But I think in this case, that's just simply not true. Even if you don't want it, I to, like, replace artists who are designing book covers and writers and even the content on the internet becoming largely AI generated, especially on LinkedIn. You don't want AI generated commercials, and you don't want like, I get it. Film, all kinds of media, I get it. I mean, really me neither. And at the same time, AI is also rapidly improving our accessibility. It's rapidly improving our ability to communicate with one another around the world, no matter who we are or what, our communication barriers look like. It's also rapidly improving sustainability. Now, this is kind of interesting because obviously data center construction uses a lot of water, and people are very concerned about that. I've been very concerned about that. We've talked about this on the podcast. But then once it is implemented, AI has been able to develop farming techniques and efficiencies that dramatically improve the sustainability and environmentalism of farming. And that's only in farming. There's a million industries that can leverage generative AI once the infrastructure is built. And again, that's with an asterisk. Once the infrastructure is there, then pretty much every industry can use it. And I mentioned medical research. One of my good friends who's hopefully listening to this, hey, Wendy, her son had shared, he's involved in, like, the medical research side, and he had shared some really, really cool stories that I'm going to totally butcher if I try to repeat, about how this medical research field, I mean, AI is going to cure cancer, and it's going to cure cancer, like, soon. And it could have a dramatic impact on other chronic diagnoses that afflict, I mean, at this point, affects in some capacity these these areas of medical research that are afflicting basically every family in one way or another. So I'm anyway, this is not meant to be like an AI episode, but I just think that that's a big part of it. And then the other thing that I think is going on when people talk about a bubble burst for AI has to do with the ethics of how the infrastructure is built. And this is where I do think it kind of feeds more into what I was saying about policy, which is it's not just about the ethics of how AI is used, it's the ethics of how AI how generative AI was built in the first place, and that participating is being complicit in how the infrastructure was built. There's just no denying that a lot of data and content was stolen from creators and everyday people in order to build and form these generative AI platforms and the foundation of how these generative AI platforms work. And in addition, they are creating billionaires who are then using those billions of dollars to fund the rise of fascism. And that is like undeniably unethical. So choosing not to participate, even though you may see the benefits in all of the things that AI could do once the infrastructure exists, participating in it then means being complicit in supporting making those tech billionaires even richer so that they are rewarded for the theft that they have already committed, as well as let alone other unethical things, as well as continuing to help them further fund people who are killing our planet and stripping our human rights. So, with all of that being acknowledged, I do understand there will be a reckoning. And I think when we talk about a bubble burst, sometimes what people are talking about is that a reckoning will happen. I would love to believe that that is true, that there will be a reckoning. I hope for that, that like justice will prevail and that people who suck are going to have to pay for it. I really would love for that to be true. Don't know that I think there's a lot of instances in history where that is really true, although sometimes indeed it does happen that way. So hopefully, yes, people are held accountable for crimes they are committing against humanity and and history will remember. I hope that that is true. And to whatever degree is realistic, I hope that they will pay for what they are doing and have done. That's definitely I definitely feel that way. Do I think that will happen in 2026? I'm gonna be real with you, no. But maybe we'll at least see progress toward that direction. So, then we'll get to what I actually do think will happen in 2026. And there's kind of two things that I thought were really interesting. So, one is something that I saw someone else say, and I do agree. I think this was a great answer. And so I want to include it here. This was not my original idea. It's not someone I know, so I can't even properly attribute the idea. But this was in that same conversation that Kaili's community has been having over on Threads. Lots of good conversations on Threads, by the way. I know we've pitched that like several times, speaking of like making tech billionaires richer, but I know we have talked about Threads as like community building many times on this podcast, but seriously, like the conversations that are going on over there are really powerful. And you just have to get into the right algorithm. So one of the things that was said over there in that thread that I really liked is somebody said that social selling, they're predicting an increase in social selling. Now, when digging into what that means, because I think kind of that terminology, what comes to mind for me, and this is what I think some other people who saw the comment thought of too, is kind of the MLM hey girl messages. And I don't think that is what will, I don't know if that's what the person meant or not. That's not what I think is true. But as the conversation continued in that thread, what I do think is implementing more and more opportunities to do commerce directly in social media. That is what I think there will be an increase to. The integration of being able to make money or be profitable and do business directly on social media apps, that will increase. So, of course, content creators have been getting paid for a while now. I don't think that's going anywhere. And then in addition, things like TikTok Shop and Facebook Marketplace, and then Facebook and Instagram also both have the ability to integrate like products to shop on the app now. Nonprofits can do fundraisers right on those apps. So there things like that. I think that is a big trend that is going to continue. And I think making it easier for more money to change hands because then there's an opportunity for them to collect fees for doing business on those apps. They're collecting all the traffic that's already there and then they're able to monetize off of it. And if you're able to monetize off it, you're probably willing to pay a convenience fee for being able to do business right then and there. Certainly, lots of products have gone viral on TikTok Shop. And so I think, yes, we're going to continue to see the integration of more direct business being done on social media apps. So that's one thing that I do think, and again, I'm not sure which this person intended because some of the comments sort of suggested that the "Hey Girl" messages is kind of what they meant, but in addition, doing business directly integrated into the app, and when I acknowledged that, the original commenter had agreed, like, "Yes, that is part of it." And for me, that's my big prediction as far as social selling, quote unquote, goes. Then I'm also going to add my own answer, which I contributed into Kaili's community. And that is, I think we're going to see actually a bit of an exodus from online business. So, talk about a reckoning. We saw in the trends, and I don't have any sources in front of me, so I don't have any actual numbers for you. You will want to go ahead. If I think of it, I will put a source in the description of the episode with like actual research and data and numbers. But I'm not going to misquote any numbers here because I don't know them. However, I do know the like trends and the facts, which are there was a mass exodus of people from the traditional workforce in 2020. We saw a huge, huge, huge shift in 2020 where people were forced out of their jobs, either because companies couldn't stay open, they were cutting costs, they were nervous, whatever it was, or because caretaking responsibilities became the forefront, like having your kids home from school full time. And this disproportionately affected women. So women were largely displaced from work. This is not a unique phenomenon. We've seen this throughout history, really. And again, I'm going to speak specifically to the United States. This is what I know the most about. But I've recommended the book, I think, on this podcast before called Women, Money, Power by Josie Cox. It came out, might have come out in 2024. It was either 2024 or the very beginning of 2025. And it is about the history of women in the workforce in the United States. So, from the beginning of women really entering the workforce in the United States, we've seen these ebbs and flows where, depending on what's going on culturally, politically, military wise, we see the shifts in how much women are gainfully employed, how much money they're making, how many of them are in the workforce, and how many of them are at home full time or in caretaker roles full time. So 2020 certainly was another example of shifting that demographic specifically out of traditional work. So then we saw this rise, and of course, gig work was not new to 2020, but we saw like a dramatic increase in gig work in 2020, where things like DoorDash and Postmates and Instacart and even Uber and Lyft really, really took off in the past 5 years. Now, of course, 6 years. Now that I said that, I also want to acknowledge, like, of course, those apps are older than 2020. I know that. So, like, you don't need to clarify that with me. I know. But we've seen a dramatic increase in people turning to those kinds of employment, and those apps have been on the rise for more and more people to participate in like a gig economy rather than a traditional workforce economy. So part of that is because of the built-in flexibility. Part of that is because of people being forced out of traditional labor jobs. Part of that is there was a bit of a, I guess, light bulb awakening for people during COVID times, the height of COVID, that people didn't want to settle for all the things they'd been putting up with in their corporate jobs. So we also saw people choosing to leave because it put things into perspective. When we have a mass amount of collective grief and sorrow and reprioritization of like what really matters in the world, justifying sitting for 9 hours a day or more in a corporate office building to do work that doesn't matter, for to be severely underpaid and to be mistreated by the man or the machine. People became really impatient and intolerant of that, and we started to see a lot of things that those of us who had started pursuing entrepreneurship before 2020, things we were already saying about wanting to like break the wheel or whatever, we started to see that becoming more mainstream conversation. Now, a huge part of that was also people turning to online entrepreneurship. This is now the boom of not just people starting businesses, especially women, but also digital courses, memberships, etc. And frankly, podcasts. So we did see this like meteoric rise of online activity, more and more businesses being run on social media, more and more branding. What is it? Like a personal brand, a content creator, an influencer, more and more of that kind of economy. We started to see a rise in that. And again, I know influencers were around way before 2020, but we did see almost like an an increase in respect for that as a job, whereas before it was much more of a joke socially. And then after 2020, it's like, well, I mean, yeah, like we're all going to get creative about how we do work and how we think about work. I also teach at ASU, and so I know in the higher ed world, we see a dramatic decrease across the country and the world of Gen Zers entering college, less and less interest, frankly, less college prep, if I'm being honest, but because their education was largely interrupted by COVID quarantine days, but also so their college preparation years were really dramatically impacted. Or now we're getting to the point where it's been enough time that foundational learning was really, really impacted. And so their college preparation is lacking. But in addition, their interest in going to college and taking out a ton of loans with crazy interest that they'll never be able to pay back to do jobs they don't want to do. They're not interested and they're choosing not to participate. We're seeing that more and more. And so they're choosing work like entrepreneurial endeavors, content creation, and brand endorsements and gig economy work, maybe a mix of all of the above, working part-time in order to have work-life balance, things like that. We're seeing choices of that in addition to the lack of college prep. So we've seen this huge swing to, I'll call it online entrepreneurship. And what I predict for 2026 is we're actually going to see a mass exodus of that because there's a whole lot of people who have entered this online business space, who have invested sometimes thousands or tens of thousands of dollars into trying to get an online business off the ground, promised the sky, right? And this is where we've been critical of coaching on this podcast in the past. And then they don't see results. Or they did, but they have been hustling month to month to month to try to make it work. Some years have been better than others. Maybe the boom of whatever their chosen profession was, whether that's being a VA, being a copywriter, building websites, whatever it is, especially in the industries like those that have really been affected by AI and automation. And the hustle is hard. And continuing to sell your own stuff is hard. Continuing to not have benefits is hard. And the appeal of going back to work sounds good. Now, here's the thing with an asterisk. I don't think most people who choose to go back to the traditional workforce will be happy in a job. So that's number one, is that I think, and I've seen this happen with a lot of friends of mine who kind of have been deciding, like, that's it, I'm going back to work. And then they hate it. But also, part of the reason they hate it is because this job market is so, as more and more people are turning back to, I'm looking for work, and there's been all these layoffs from the government, et cetera. Of course, a lot of those people have been hired back, but we did see this like influx of talented, experienced labor looking for jobs. All of these people are competing for the same jobs. That doesn't give employers incentive to give you good benefits, doesn't give employers incentive to treat you well because you're a commodity with a lot of supply. So I think that's part of the problem. I think also jobs suck. I remember it well. And honestly, you'd have to pay me a heck of a lot in order to go back to a traditional work environment. And I'd need a lot of flexibility because what I have now, I wouldn't be willing to sacrifice. And so I think there's things about it that are hard. And so I think that's going to push a lot of people back into the job market, especially people who are not profitable and have not been profitable for a long period of time, which I think is a lot of online entrepreneurs. So pushing people back into the more traditional workforce. So I think we're going to see a very competitive job market. I think we're going to see a lot of people choosing to shut their doors. I think we're going to hear a lot of announcements of like, I'm done with this Instagram page. This is over. This podcast is ending, or maybe even not announcing. They're just going to ghost. I think it's going to get a lot quieter in the online business space as people are pursuing the more traditional job market. I am hopeful that we're also going to see a turn in our economy where there are jobs available, but like I said, not really trying to go down that path right now. I just don't feel like I have enough information to make a prediction, and also it's loaded. It's very, very contentious in the United States. So I think that is going to be really interesting to continue to see. I think that there's a lot of litigation at this point for apps and for kind of the same reckoning that people are desiring for the tech billionaires that have built these generative AI models. The tech billionaires also built the social media platforms, and they also built these gig economy platforms. And we're seeing a lot of turn in the tide against Airbnb. That was such a thing. And now Airbnb is buried in lawsuits, and it's got what I've heard, I've never worked there, but what I've heard is a very toxic work environment. I've heard a lot of people selling their Airbnbs. It's a very, very tough industry to get into because it's become so litigious that what used to be a really accessible way to both travel and pursue entrepreneurship is now actually like a massive legal liability and very, very risky. And so there's just a lot of layers, and it's just become a contentious tug of war. I think we're going to see more of that with these lawsuits with companies like ride sharing, with grocery delivery and food delivery. I think that pursuing workers' rights is going to be really litigious. I think customer experience is going to be really litigious. I think hidden fees and expenses is going to be really litigious. And so that's going to really change the outlook of that tech landscape. And with the growth of AI, people can build more and more things themselves that they don't need to rely on these other apps or whatever to do this for them. So, anyways, that's what I'm thinking. I'm predicting a lot of people are going to quit. So, I'm interested to know, what do you think is coming in 2026? Do you think that appeals to you? You're like, "Yeah, I kind of would like to have a salaried, benefited job working in a in an office with other people, and, like, have a stable paycheck and know what days I'm getting paid and not have to chase that paycheck down," and, like, is that you? Are you like, "Yeah, I've actually been kinda thinking that. I've actually been kinda itching for that." Do you know people who have been saying that? I'm curious if you think that trend is that prediction is accurate, or if you think I'm full of shit. I'm also curious what you're predicting and what you think is coming for 2026. How are things changing? How's the landscape changing? So you can come follow me on social media. All my links, of course, are in the description of the episode, and I would love to connect with you over there. I am going to be bringing guests back on the podcast. I need to get more recording dates set up, and I didn't want to record over the holidays with guests. I didn't want to try to balance all of that at the same time. So more guest episodes coming soon. If you've been a guest on this podcast before, definitely excited to have you back. And if you have applied, but you haven't heard anything yet, or if you are just a listener that is interested in coming on the show, I would love to have you. Please learn more and submit your form at bigbravebusiness.com. And I will follow up as soon as there are recording dates available. And even if you apply after there are recording dates available, I will reach out and share with you the ones that are still remaining. But if it takes a little bit of time from the time you submit the form, just know it's because at the time of recording this, there's no recording dates available. We're enjoying the holidays, and we will come back with more recordings in the new year. Okay. Happy 2026, everybody. Hope everybody's been safe and getting some rest and spending time with the people who mean the most, doing the things that mean the most. And that's what this time of year should be all about. So, all right, sending all my love. See you next week.